Welcome, Meryl. Delighted to have you on.
I'm so glad to be back with you, Cornelia. You're always so prepared and you ask interesting questions.
All right, wonderful. So first, a little bit about Meryl Nass. She's a medical doctor for internal medicine who lives in Maine, and she's an expert in anthrax, bioterrorism, and vaccine safety. And she identified the first modern use of anthrax as a biological weapon. She has also consulted for federal agencies, including the Director of National Intelligence and the World Bank, on issues related to bioterrorism. Furthermore, she's a well-known critic of the COVID-19 pandemic treatment guidelines and the mRNA COVID shot mandates. Now, the state of Maine suspended Meryl's doctoral license during COVID because she dared to prescribe ivermectin to her patients. And as a thank you for saving her patients, she was forbidden to practice medicine. Her license was suspended and she was harassed by the Maine Medical Board for years. And you still are, correct, Meryl?
My license is still suspended, yes.
Wow, isn't that just awesome? Like,
yes,
years.
And I have two cases pending. One is an appeal and one is a case against the board for a malicious prosecution. And it seems that the judges have decided to leave me in limbo and just not rule because it's probably too politically dangerous for them.
Yeah, I bet. So they just leave you in limbo. Malicious prosecution, I like that. That's pretty much what it amounts to. It sounds good. Malicious prosecution. Yeah. Okay. Well, but we are going to talk about something totally different. I'm going to talk to Meryl about two particular sections in this Interior Environment Appropriations Bill for 2026. They have one of these bills every single year. This bill is over 200 pages long, and there are two sections in there, and they are very brief. And one of the sections has to do with giving something amounting to a liability shield for pesticides to manufacturers. And the other one has to do with the use of sewage sludge as a fertilizer spread on farmland in the United States. So the House floor vote on the bill is going to happen pretty soon. I don't know really when, but it's expected soon, right? Like in this week,
Correct.
next week, something like that?
Exactly. Sometime in the next couple of weeks, it's expected to go forward. So it's already been voted on by the subcommittee and the full committee of this appropriations. It's called the Environment and Interior Appropriations Committee. And they allowed these two riders to go through. So they left them in the bill. They had been inserted in the bill at the last minute. People were not aware of them. There was some quite interesting disagreement between the Republicans and Democrats about what the pesticide rider actually meant, what it was meant to do. And but in any event, they both passed, and now we'll go to the full House and possibly the full Senate.
So, what actually is a rider? Does that mean that it's inserted later into a bill?
Yes, it's like an amendment, but it's not necessarily part of any other bill. So it's a bill. It's called a rider because it's very short. Each of these is only 8 or 9 lines long, basically one paragraph. And so it's a new bill. There's been no hearings on it. There was no prior discussion, but committee chairmen, in this case, Mike Simpson of the subcommittee, are in a position where they can add these at the last minute and hope to get them through. And as you know, sometimes these riders contain pork for particular industries or businesses that the ranking member or the chair of the committee favors. And so Mr. Mike Simpson of Idaho put these bills in and claimed that the pesticide rider was only about interstate commerce. And let me explain that a bit, although it didn't really make sense. So California has basically its own EPA, and California states are allowed to apply more restrictions on substances, on commodities that we buy than the federal government it puts on them. So California adds labels to many products that say that this is considered a carcinogen in California. Something in there is a carcinogen, and so it's a warning. Now, most other states just go with the federal government and don't have those additional warning labels. So what Chairman Simpson claimed to be doing with this rider was trying to take away the right of California to impose its own restrictions on pesticides. Now, that may or may not be what the rider means because there's some ambiguity in the language, but the Democrats felt that it meant something completely different.
Okay. And we are going to look at this one sentence that this rider is comprised of. It's interesting with these riders. So you say they are often stuck into a bill at the very last minute. So literally like hours before, right? Could just be, I guess there's no time limit which is surprising to me because I mean, as somebody who has, so if you are in this appropriations committee, you want to be prepared. You want to know what's in it. And if somebody sticks something in there like 5 minutes before, you can't even talk to your lawyers and study the thing and understand what it's about. But apparently that's legal, right? To do that up to the very last
Yes,
second?
you've got, for the subcommittee, it was inserted 24 hours before the subcommittee was meeting to vote on it. And for the full committee, they have to make the bill known. The chair of the full committee has to share that bill that he is presenting to his members 48 hours ahead of time.
Okay, 48 hours. So it gives you a little bit more time, but even that's not enough, in my opinion. It really reminds me of the PrEP Act because they stuck the PrEP Act, which is 20 pages long. It's way longer than these little riders. 20 pages long. They stuck that in, I don't know, after midnight or around midnight, late in the evening on the day before it was voted on, I think. And there was never I guess many people weren't even aware of it. And there was some objections from the Democrats, but still, it was way too late. And also, the surreptitious way of including something very, very important in a bill, it's a terrible way to do things. And the only reason I think it's done is to sneak something in that wouldn't pass muster otherwise.
Right. It's to confuse the members who have to vote on it, so they don't know precisely what they're voting on.
Right. So these riders, how many such brief riders are riding on this bill that we are talking about? Do
So
you know?
I don't know. I know of 3, and I decided to put some energy into 2 of them. But there may be many more. There at the subcommittee meeting and the markup, they went through a number of different sections. So there were other riders, but I didn't count them.
And as I said, it's a 200-page bill just to go through. And these riders, I mean, they are explosive. It's just one sentence, but so because when I first read this rider, section 453, I believe, the rider
Mhm.
that amounts to this liability shield for pesticide manufacturers. When I read that sentence, well, it's hard to understand. When I read it, it was completely unclear to me what it means. And it didn't make sense to me. So I had no clue really. I was just kind of lost. Um, well, actually, let's have a look at that sentence. I'm going to share my screen. We can
Yes.
look at it together, and then you
Yes.
tell me what this is actually
Well,
about.
now let's also start from the beginning that this is a rider that Bayer wants. And the reason Bayer wants it is because after they spent over $60 billion to buy Monsanto 7 years ago, 2 months later, Monsanto lost its first case regarding the fact that glyphosate was found to have been causal in someone's non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a cancer, a blood cancer, a blood and immune organ cancer. So Bayer was suddenly saddled with a whole lot of liability it wasn't prepared for. And over the last couple of years, Bayer has been doing everything possible to try to get rid of that liability, which has already costed $11 billion in settling claims with 67,000 claimants. And there are over 100,000 claimants left that it hasn't settled with. And it has set aside $17 billion to pay the claims, to fight the claims, and to attempt to make the liability go away, or at least go away in future. It's also reformulated the glyphosate herbicide mix that is sold for home gardens, because it's mostly home gardeners that have been challenging it in court. So it may be glyphosate alone, or it may most likely be the actual mixture that it's in that causes it to be carcinogenic. But the EPA only regulates one item at a time, one ingredient at a time. It does not regulate combinations, and it doesn't even require the company to tell you what is in the mix apart from the designated active ingredient. So anyway, the designated active ingredient is glyphosate, but the actual thing people are exposed to are mixtures. And so Bayer changed the mixture for home gardeners in this period of time. They also went to the Supreme Court. They said, look, we've won a case in one district, we've lost cases in other districts, and we need the Supreme Court to basically give us a hopefully a positive answer as to whether people have the right to sue, you know, and hoping actually to get rid of liability that way. They've also gone to 21 different states and tried to get laws passed, which have been passed in 2 states and ignored. They never got to a vote in most states, but 2 states have given them a preemption law, which means that the state will have to abide by whatever the federal EPA regulation is on glyphosate. The state cannot impose any stricter regulation. Now, why is that important? It's important because the people, these 67,000 people who have won awards against Bayer and Monsanto, have won them on the basis of a legal strategy called failure to warn. So the current label on glyphosate products does not say it can cause cancer. It is, even though there is plenty of evidence both for the manufacturer and for the EPA that suggests it does cause cancer. And so because the company did not go to the EPA and say, we want to add this warning to our label, we've now learned that this pesticide is more dangerous than we thought. Because Bayer didn't do that, Monsanto didn't do that, this failure to warn doctrine is the basis for winning cases against Bayer.
Right.
So what they've tried to do in this rider is to make it very difficult to change the label so that nobody could say Bayer had the opportunity to change the label, should have asked the EPA to change it, but it didn't do that. Instead, the EPA would be required to go through a very laborious and time-consuming process before it was allowed to change the label. And nobody could use this new information about carcinogenesis or any other side effects, that the product might cause until the label had been changed by EPA. And that process is presumed to take years. So
Right.
so why don't you read the rider to people, and then we can go through it.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do that. And then let's also talk about the situation with Bayer, which is Bayer, right? It's just pronounced Bayer in English.
Yes,
Bayer.
yes, in
Okay.
the
Yes.
US,
Right. Right.
Bayer.
Because I guess Bayer I mean, Bayer is probably worried about going bankrupt with being sued and having to pay billions of dollars to additional people. So that's why that's why they see it in their interest to hide the dangers about the product they sell. And they probably deeply regret the decision to ever buy Monsanto. They had
Right.
probably no idea what they were getting into, but that was a very bad decision on their part. But anyway, we can talk about that later, and also about the cancerogenity, about the pesticides, because that's really a very important point, and you want to get to the bottom of this. How dangerous are these products? I mean, we need to know this, right? We just need to find out how dangerous is this stuff. But let's have a look at this section 453. Here it is. So, and all it says is, it's really just one long sentence. So it says, none
Yeah.
of the funds, the section 453, none of the funds made available by this or any other act may be used to issue or adopt any guidance or any policy, taking any regulatory action, or approve any labeling or change to such labeling that is inconsistent with or in any respect different from the conclusion of, and now they have different from the conclusion of a human health assessment performed pursuant to the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, or B, a carcinogenicity classification for a pesticide. Okay, wow, there's a lot in this one sentence. Meryl, what on
Yes.
earth does this mean?
So let's parse the words. This is an appropriations bill, so it's about funding. So, and remember, Bayer can afford the best lawyers in the world. So they've tried to come up with a mechanism by which Bayer would not suffer liability for a period of time anyway. And so it's about funding, no funds, no federal funds, and and it doesn't even specify an agency. So no funds can be spent by any federal agency made available by this or any other act. You can't write a bill in somewhere else and allow funding for this process. There's no money to issue or adopt any guidance or any policy. So you cannot change the label or change any policy about pesticides, or take any regulatory action unless if it's inconsistent with or in any respect different from the conclusion of a human health assessment performed pursuant to the big law, a very long law that tells us how pesticides are to be regulated. And pesticide in this bill, pesticide is defined to include herbicides, fungicides, virucides, insecticides, rodenticides, etc. There's a whole class of products that are designed to kill. They are designed to be toxic. So you can't spend any money to change the warning label or to take any regulatory action or to change any policy unless you've gone through the human health assessment as specified by this Pesticide Act, or if you've performed a completely new carcinogenicity classification. Now, I went through this FIFRA, the Federal Fungicide, etc. Act, and I found that neither carcinogenicity classification nor human health assessment are actually specified within that act. So that was a surprise. Within EPA regulations, however, there are methods for performing a human health assessment and for performing a carcinogenicity classification. So presumably there was sloppy drafting by a lawyer of this bill because perform pursuant to this act doesn't really make sense because you have to go outside the act to find the health assessment and the carcinogenicity classification. And that may have been deliberate because if it was, then the rider doesn't really make a great deal of sense. And so a judge will have to determine what it means. And so maybe that's what they wanted. It looks like this is going to go to a judge pretty soon if it passes. Be that
can
as
I
it
just
may.
interrupt you here briefly, Meryl, because so that's really interesting. You said this law, this Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, Rodenticide Act, it's called FIFRA, you said, right?
Yes.
This FIFRA thing. So you actually looked at this FIFRA Act and you say that it doesn't really contain a definition of, or it doesn't contain a health assessment of the of the impact of these pesticides. Is that correct?
Right. It doesn't tell you how to perform a human health assessment, even though
Right.
this rider says you have to perform a human health assessment pursuant to this bill, but this bill
Wow.
doesn't tell you how.
Oh, okay. Well, that's really pretty astounding. So either the person who wrote this didn't even
Right.
know the act
Didn't read FIFRA.
that they're talking about here, or this is just to obfuscate things and mislead. For
Exactly.
what? I mean, this is extremely strange. I mean, maybe we have so many laws and regulations and acts that are huge and that nobody can read and retain that people don't even know. Well, I guess you could ask AI now, right? Ask them, is there, you could
I
ask them to
I
get
don't
at
use
the
AI
information.
for these sorts of things because it's not accurate enough.
True. You don't you would yeah, that's true. That's true. You would have to double check whether what AI tells you is actually correct. Okay, well that's rather astounding that 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 this is the case. But yeah, go on.
Okay. Um, be that as it may, assuming that they meant to use the EPA mechanisms, and they may or may not have, it would take a long time to either reclassify this product as a carcinogen or to perform a human health assessment, particularly a long time because almost all the data comes from animal experiments, right? So performing a human, I mean, when you see it kills rats, it kills mice, it kills hamsters. But what does it do to humans? If they say you have to do the human health assessment, it's going to be delayed, most likely. So what we believe is that Bayer was looking for a delay. Now, within FIFRA does this long bill that regulates pesticides, does review pesticides. It is supposed to, according to a 2007 amendment to the bill, it is supposed to review pesticides at least every 15 years. Now, of course, like every federal agency, it's late doing that. But what was claimed is that it would normally take 4 to 12 years before the EPA was going to redo a warning label in general. So people think Bayer was trying to gain 4 to 12 years before a carcinogenicity warning was added to the label if this bill rider passed. Now,
Oh, wow. That's very rare, right? These label. I mean, if some
yes.
new information comes across, or if we understand better how these pesticides work, and we have more information, we gather more information constantly, and plus there have been all these lawsuits.
So
By
there are mechanisms to do an urgent label change. And now I'm guessing at this, but I think that Bayer knew that the EPA is a captured agency and that as long as they could leave it up to Bayer rather than the courts to to give a new label, they would be able to make it last a long time. They could prevent an urgent label change. For example, there had been a, a draft report on glyphosate and it was not done well. It was very sloppy. And so the courts sent it back to the EPA to be redone. And so the last finalized assessment of glyphosate was actually in 1993. So we're
what?
talking about
In 1990, that's
32
32
years ago.
years.
32 years ago, because the last one wasn't done properly and the courts sent it back to EPA to redo. So I think Bayer felt like they could control the EPA better than they could control the courts. But again, I'm hypothesizing.
I mean, this whole thing is so weird. So you have the EPA, it's required to do a reassessment, correct? If I understand this
Yes.
correctly, every 15 years for these pesticides.
Yes.
For the very, so let's say for glyphosate. So they have to review it every 15 years,
But
which is, yes.
remember, they only review an individual ingredient at a time. They don't review mixtures, which is a problem nor do they look at, you remember, for instance, if you're growing fruit trees, you will often spray them with one pesticide and then a week later a different one. And the EPA does not look at combinations. So
Hmm.
what needs to be looked at is the actual product with whatever is in it
So
and test the
glyphosate, is that a
toxicity.
mixture? That is a
It's a
mixture too?
mixture, yes.
Oh, wow. So it would just do, so the EPA would just do this 15-year review of one
Of
particular ingredient
glyphosate
in
alone,
glyphosate. How
rather
many
than,
ingredients are there in glyphosate? Do you know?
well, they don't have to label them. If they claim they are
Oh,
inactive, so if Bayer tells the EPA they're inactive and the EPA chooses to believe them, they just write, Bayer, glyphosate, let's say, is 5% and 95% inactive ingredients, and that's all you know.
oh, wow. So, oh, that's really interesting. So you say, oh, inactive ingredients, that sounds really harmless. It's not going to hurt anyone. It's an inactive ingredients. Who
Right.
cares? But you're saying that how do we actually know? Because maybe it's true, but maybe it's not true. But I mean, if they are inactive ingredients, you could safely just say what they are, right? There's enough space on the bag to put that information there, I
Right.
would think.
Sure. But you may have noticed that your personal care products are the same.
Yes.
Unless you're eating them, the FDA, the regulatory agencies do not require. It's the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. So, but if it's a
Right.
cosmetic, it's not required to specify all the ingredients.
Right, which is bad because it goes in your skin, which means you kind of eat it, through your skin. It goes into your body. It's not like it stays on just
Exactly.
on the surface. But I mean, this stuff we also eat. It goes on the plants, and we don't know how much is retained and how it affects us. But certainly, if you just look at this glyphosate stuff and on how many people are wheat intolerant now, I never knew a single person who couldn't eat bread when I was. I mean, they're like that's just something totally new.
Mhm.
That some people can't eat bread. I didn't know about that even just 20 years ago. But this whole thing is just that's just like opening a Pandora's box right there. So you on glyphosate itself, you say glyphosate and then 95% inactive stuff, you don't know what that is, and that might not even be the truth. Who knows?
Right.
And then EPA does this review for this active ingredient in glyphosate. Is that called glyphosate itself, the active ingredient, or does
Yes.
it have a
Yes.
Okay,
It's
so
called
they do.
glyphosate.
Okay, so they do it on this one thing, and then it's done sloppily. You said, and
Well, this is the
what is
problem you
that?
have when you have a controlled agency.
So they have
Have
how long
to
do they work? So they have to do it every 15 years. How long do they work on this review? Is it years?
Supposedly, they work on it for years.
And then they do it so sloppily that it's returned back to them. But I
Well,
mean, at that
maybe
point,
it was sloppy, maybe it was deliberately, maybe it deliberately left out important information.
but then I would think, okay, if after 15 years they do such a sloppy job that the courts say, no, this is not good enough, do it again, then I would think at that point you have to stop selling the stuff because the regulation, the mandate that you have to review the safety of this ingredient after every 15 years was not fulfilled. So there's no knowledge now about how safe this glyphosate thing
Yes.
is. So you cannot sell it anymore.
That
You
that
cannot
that's
just
not how things work here in the US. So, for instance, the FDA is expected to actually perform an investigation and an inspection of manufacturing plants for drugs every 2 years. Well, they almost never do that. And outside the country, on average, someone wrote, and this was years ago, they said they do an inspection on the average every 11 years for drug factories outside the US. And most of our drugs are imported now. The active pharmaceutical ingredients are made elsewhere.
True. That's true. Like for in China, but that's also incredible. So there are all these mandates swimming around, right? The FDA has
Yes.
to inspect these manufacturing companies every 2 years, but they just don't do it. So are there
Right.
any repercussions? Are they going to be
No, there are no
held?
repercussions. In fact, that what the FDA tried to do at the end of the Biden regime was to change the rules so that they would perform virtual inspections. They wouldn't even need to send inspectors anywhere,
Virtual?
and they would just do it by video. So that was the plan.
No kidding.
I'm
That
not
was the
kidding.
plan. By video, virtual. Wow.
Yeah.
But,
How are you gonna find the secret documents, you know? I mean, really, you need to go there and inspect the books. If you're doing it virtually, you'll never find anything.
I mean, what's the use of any of these rules or mandates if nothing happens if you don't do them? So why it's
Well,
just
I
like
mean, that
window
is a
dressing.
question, is what is the purpose of government? And is it to act as a handmaiden for industry, or is it to protect the public? And if the agencies have been captured, you know, how do we turn these agencies around? And now we have Trump and Bobby Kennedy attempting to turn some of the agencies around and have, you know, and really the media are piling on.
Yeah, and boy, is it difficult. Absolutely. But uh, yeah, this is just also incredible. They have to do it every 2 years, this FDA, and they don't do it. Then maybe they do it every 11 years, nothing happens. And as a consumer, you have no idea. I mean, if I would read the FDA has to do this every 2 years, I would assume that they actually have to do it. And if they don't do it, then something drastic happens because they are.
Right. And by the way, they don't have enough inspectors, and you have to train inspectors. So even if they wanted to do it right, they wouldn't be able to find the personnel to do it at this point.
Okay. Okay. So, well, let's get back to this section 453. So, well, okay. So we found out that this review that they did was not accepted by the courts, and that but that didn't mean that they could stop selling the glyphosate.
No,
No,
they
they
kept
just
selling it. As I said, they reformulated the for home gardeners so that they changed the inactive ingredients, but we don't know what they changed. Presumably, they knew that some of the inactive ingredients were contributing to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma or other side effects, and so they've attempted to reduce that problem.
yeah,
Um,
that's super interesting that they changed the inactive ingredients. Why on earth would you change something as harmless as inactive ingredients that you don't
right,
even have to list on your bag? It doesn't make any sense if they were really truly harmless. So
exactly.
why bother? I mean,
I
what?
mean, the
They
thing
changed.
is, we know they're not harmless, but the EPA rules do not allow them to test combinations. So we need a change, but the EPA has been a captured agency for a very long time.
So
And
how do we know that these inactive ingredients are in fact not harmless?
how do we know? I have not reviewed the literature, but somebody who has explained it to me. So I have to say that. And because they changed the formulation, they wouldn't have done that unless they knew there was a problem.
Yeah, because you said we don't really know what is in these inactive ingredients. Does anybody know? Does the EPA know, for example, what
That's a
these
good
are?
question. I don't know if they know.
I mean, I don't. I find this so suspicious. Oh yeah, there is this thing, glyphosate, and then that's just 5%, so don't worry about that. But then there's 95% harmless stuff. So who's going to believe that after all that has happened? I'm not going to believe that. Is anybody going to be so naive to believe that? So,
Well, yes. I mean, glyphosate is the world's best-selling herbicide, so a lot of
mhm,
people believe it.
I know. But the question is, should they? And especially if they don't let you know, they are hiding the 95% of the ingredients, and that is unacceptable. But the
Yes.
glyphosate itself is, of course, dangerous. It's a pesticide, and it should have been the whole thing should have been there should have been a proper review. You said there wasn't a review since 1993, you said,
No
correct?
finalized review.
No final well,
There
yeah,
was this other one that has been, sent back to be
correct. But
reworked
so that
several
was
years ago, and it
right.
hasn't, and we haven't had a better, a finalized version yet.
Yeah, I mean anything but a finalized version is like no version. So there
Right.
hasn't been a real version in 32 years. That's That's pretty
Inconscionable.
inconceivable. Yeah, it really is. Okay, so, but
Okay, and so
so,
now I should tell you that Bayer has been using a lot of lies to try to get this rider through. So as I said, they claimed it only had to do, or Simpson claimed it only had to do with interstate commerce, and he didn't want California to have a different label than Idaho. But the Democrats said, look, this will change the ability of claimants who've gotten cancer to actually sue the manufacturer because the label won't, because Bayer won't be able to change the label unless this long process has been completed. So it would take away failure to warn as a cause of action.
yeah, the whole thing, Mary, the whole thing is so ridiculous. So they're trying to dress up Bayer as the poor victim who would love so much to tell people how cancerogenic, how dangerous and cancer-inducing their own product is, right? But poor Bayer is not allowed to do that because because
Right,
they are forbidden to do it, so they can't do it.
right,
And this
exactly.
is what a ridiculous story. I mean,
Um,
interstate commerce, that's always the one thing that is used to shove anything down our throats that is unconstitutional. You can just, oh yeah, let's do the interstate commerce thing, if we cannot find any other way to justify something.
right. So another thing is this doesn't glyphosate's name is not in this rider. This rider applies to all pesticides. There are 57,000
Right.
different formulations of pesticides that have been registered by the EPA. It would apply to all of them. And if it really did shield them from liability, we can virtually be assured that they will make their products more sloppily and that more dangerous products are likely to come on the market if they really do have a good liability shield. If they can get a label that says the product isn't dangerous, and then we find out, a year or two later than it is, because that's how long it takes. It may take longer than that, but it usually takes at least a year or two to find out a product is dangerous. They will have that time during which they are not liable for the dangers.
Yeah, so they probably have even much more time, because even if it can be proven that, even if somebody outside of the EPA, if there is some evidence or even a proof how dangerous it is, then doesn't mean that the EPA starts doing this emergency review process immediately and does it in a way that it's accepted by the courts. And who knows? We just saw that's 32 years for this glyphosate since this glyphosate finalized review. So, what is the average? Who knows how long it has been for all these other tens of thousands of pesticides that are on the market. I mean,
Exactly.
why would you trust anything after reading just about this one case? Is this an outlier? I mean, I have no idea. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe, who knows? But even just every 15 years, they have to do this review, and then the labeling is just way, 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 way behind it. So that's just the whole thing is just absolutely shocking. And why? I mean, the EPA is the EPA. What's the position of the EPA on all this? You say it's a captured agency.
Yes.
So
Historically, it has been.
cap, captured
It
by the manufacturers
yes,
pesticide manufacturers, for example. When did
exactly.
this happen? Say a few words about since when that is the case and how it happened.
Well, the EPA was formed during the Nixon administration, so it didn't exist before that. And during the Nixon administration, Nixon brought forward the Clean Air and Clean Water Acts, and then the EPA was to regulate air and water. Um, Now, I can't tell you the whole history, but what I can say is that almost everyone agrees that the EPA has done a very bad job. You may remember that after 9/11, the EPA went down to Lower Manhattan and there was all this toxic dust with asbestos and all sorts of things in it. And they said that the head of the EPA then was Christy Whitman, and she said, "No, there's no danger. You can breathe this stuff. Don't worry. Don't move." And of course, it turned out it was very dangerous, and many people developed very severe lung diseases as a result,
I
particularly the first
know.
responders. So that was
Yes,
the
yes, yes.
EPA.
And Meryl, I also read that she actually knew better. She knew that that was not true what she said.
Well, unfortunately, this is what we've come to expect from government, is that our leaders are not informing us of the truth. They are telling us the narrative that they've been told to give us, and if they don't do that, they lose their jobs. And keeping their job is more important than telling the truth. So,
Right,
um,
right.
we have for instance, the water in Flint. EPA should have jumped in there and uh, helped them to fix that problem, but didn't. So the EPA just really hasn't done what we expect it to. We have we have a lot of terrible water systems. We have many places with bad air quality, and we have many industries polluting, and people who live in the immediate vicinity are developing chronic illnesses. And all
Yes,
of that should be regulated by the EPA, but is not being
that's right.
regulated
Yeah.
properly.
Um, in the PrEP Act, I think in 2017, the PrEP Act was declared for nerve agents and also for some insecticides, which fall under the pesticides, right? So for insecticides as a biological weapon. So,
Are you sure about that? I think
yes, I'm sure about that. It was 2007, I think it was 2017, and the PrEP Act was declared for nerve agents and certain insecticides that,
Oh, I see what you're saying. So the it was for agents that would work against nerve gas. So like
yes, so
atropine auto-injectors, which because so nerve gas is organophosphates, and they are also and some pesticides are in that class as well.
yes, and that's
So
probably why they listed them. But I thought that was very interesting because they have insecticides there as something so dangerous that it can be used as a biological weapon. That's why the PrEP Act was declared for certain insecticides. And so medical countermeasures against these insecticides are completely free from liability, which means that the government is well aware of the dangers of pesticides, or in this case, insecticides, and they can be so dangerous that they can be used as biological weapons. I just wanted to put that out there that
yes,
this is
that's a very interesting point. So let me just use some terms. The three old types of nerve gas that we know about that are used in war, have been used in wars, are sarin, soman, and VX. And 1 milligram on your skin of VX is a lethal dose.
wow.
Malathion and parathion are in the same class. They are not as toxic to humans, right? Because VX is designed to kill. These are designed to kill insects and not people. But if you are a farm worker and you get a lot of malathion or parathion on your skin, you too can have a crisis with your nerves releasing too much neurotransmitter, and your temperature can rise very high, and potentially you can die. So it's good for people to be aware that malathion and parathion have often been sprayed on our fruits, for instance.
Interesting. And are those the ones that are for which the PrEP Act has been declared? These two, do you know?
So the PrEP Act isn't declared to give the manufacturers of these products
Right,
liability. It's
right.
giving the manufacturer of the countermeasures to these
Hmm.
products liability. And so, as I said, atropine auto-injectors were one of the countermeasures for this that soldiers were given, told if you were exposed in Iraq to these nerve gases, you should inject yourself with atropine.
Ah, okay, okay, interesting. So that means if they inject themselves with this countermeasure and they die, because of it, because of the injection, then, or they are seriously harmed by it, then,
Right.
well, too bad. But there's nobody you can turn to, or, well, you can go to this uh, compensation program for the PrEP Act, which is worthless. Yeah, but in any case, I just mentioned that because it shows the dangers of pesticides or insecticides. They can be used as they can be made so poisonous and so toxic that they can be used as biological weapons.
Yes.
So to have something, to have a rider section in this bill that amounts to a liability shield for pesticide manufacturers is a really bad idea. If this bill passes, and it probably will because it already passed in the committees. I mean, are people really not going to pass it because of a couple of riders? I doubt it. But let's just assume, but I also don't know. Maybe it's not going to be passed. I hope so. But in case it passes, what are farmers? I mean, they are the ones who are most at risk because they apply the stuff. They should at least know that they have to protect themselves. They shouldn't do it in flip-flops and T-shirts, right? When they
Right.
spray
Right.
the stuff or um,
So apparently the label says that they should be wearing long pants and socks and shoes, etc. But in the ads that Bayer has produced, they have people in flip-flops and shorts applying it.
right.
So unless the farmer reads the label, see, what FDA and EPA rely on is that once they have a label with a warning or it tells you how to dress, they feel like they are now absolved of responsibility. That we've told you what to do to protect yourself. If you can't follow our instructions correctly to the letter, then it's your problem. And unfortunately, who reads labels to that extent, especially when they're long and they print them in such small print, such a small font that it's impossible to read them without a magnifying glass. So this is how the
That's so,
agencies
that's
get
so
away with
true.
things.
That's so true. I have to take a picture with my phone and then magnify that in order even to see what's on there. Yeah. So yeah, that's great for Bayer. They just say, look, it's not our fault. It's the evil EPA's fault because they don't update these labels, and we would so much love to do that to warn you of the dangers of this deadly product. Oh, yeah, totally ridiculous. But if somebody is harmed, if these farmers think it's, oh yeah, the picture on the bag shows somebody in T-shirt and it's totally harmless. I mean, if they are going to be harmed, right, and they cannot sue, can they sue? What are they going to do?
Well, they've been suing and they've been winning cases. And as I said, there's 100,000 plus cases in the hopper that are waiting to be resolved. Um, and so Bayer wants them to be resolved as cheaply as possible. And Bayer has told I have a photo of a billboard in Missouri. Missouri's the home state for Monsanto. That tells farmers, stick with us, basically. It's the trial lawyers who are trying to take away your glyphosate. They're trying to remove your tools. They're trying to get rid of modern agriculture and stick with us. And the trial lawyers are not your friends. And so Bayer is trying to make the farmers think that what the trial lawyers are doing is trying to ban the use of glyphosate when all they're doing is trying to get money for clients who have been injured.
Hmm. So you
And then
said,
Bayer has also threatened that the price of the pesticides would rise by 150% if the trial lawyers have their way. So they're trying to make this about something else. As I said, let me see. Bayer has also threatened they could spin off part of the company and leave the liability in this spin-off portion, and then that portion would run out of money, and there wouldn't be enough money to pay all the claims.
so you said earlier, Meryl, that it's mainly consumers who sued
Yes, because there are
Bayer,
a lot
and
more consumers using glyphosate than there are farmers and landscapers.
just
We
because
only
they are
have
so.
we have 2 million farms, 1.9 million farms in the United States. But we have 350 million people.
Okay, but I would still expect, as a percentage of farmers, that more farmers are suing because they must
Yes,
be harmed more because they are
right.
exposed to that stuff way, way more than the consumer is with a little garden and, maybe doing this once or twice a year or something like that, or not?
Yes. But, the consumer has choice. The farmer may feel he has no choice because he has been locked into contracts with Monsanto Bayer that require him to buy the seeds and then use the, Roundup Ready seeds. He's got to have the Roundup to use with the Roundup Ready seeds. He can't use any other pesticide. He can't grow organically, and he's tied in. I mean, I haven't looked at the contracts, but farmers have to sign contracts and promise, to use all the products that Bayer produces that are intended to be used together.
Mhm, mhm.
It's also
Interesting.
difficult for farmers to access non-GMO seeds now because Bayer, Syngenta, Dow own most of the seed companies. So
Right.
Bayer
Yeah.
bought up about, I don't know, 40 seed companies before it rolled out its GMO seeds. So although you can get small amounts of seeds for gardening, farmers who need many pounds of seeds often have trouble obtaining what they want.
Okay, okay. That's very interesting. Now I want to come back to these 100,000 cases in the hopper that you mentioned. So I remember that there was this one case by someone who developed cancer after using glyphosate and got an enormous payout. Like it was reduced later on, I think, but it was
Yes,
like
the first
hundreds of
case,
millions. Hmm.
over 200 million was the first case. And,
Okay.
it was reduced in 2 different legal cases, um, so he eventually got 21 million.
Okay, so it's so huge amounts of money, and that is what makes me really suspicious because um, so you have if you have a verdict that gives out such an enormous amount of money, even if it's reduced later on, first of all, the lawyers are going to get a nice chunk of it. So that gives having a case like this, if something like this happens, you will have lots of lawyers who are going to jump on anyone who wants to sue Bayer because of glyphosate, because of Roundup.
Right.
So that's bad. That's a really bad incentive. And then also, no wonder that tons of people want to sue because almost everybody who has a garden is going to use glyphosate at some point. So a lot of these people are going to develop cancer. Does it have to do with glyphosate or not? Nobody knows. But if they if you get contacted by one of these ambulance chasing lawyers who says, well, did you use glyphosate and now you're sick? We know you have cancer, so did you ever use glyphosate? And so you say yes. They say, okay, jump on this class action lawsuit, or let us just sue and you don't have to pay anything. But if you win, you get a huge chunk of money and we do too. So there are so many bad incentives on all sides that it makes me really suspicious. And of course, for a manufacturing company, this is a complete disaster. Because I mean, if you are an honest manufacturer and you have a good product, even then you have to be afraid of completely absurd lawsuits against your product that was abused in a completely in a way that it should never have been used, and which would be obvious to anybody with a half a brain in their heads. But in the United States, at least, I mean, it's a very litigious country, and um, per capita is probably not even that litigious, but the payouts are so enormous that it
Yes,
just gives all these screwed incentives to the lawyers and to consumers as well.
it does, but you would think these would be an incentive for the manufacturers to not make dangerous products. But instead, it's
Mhm.
incentivizing Bayer to, find a way out rather than making safer products. So that's a problem. And if Bayer gets this rider passed, um, as I said, it will affect every single pesticide there is, 57,000, and it will be an incentive for the manufacturers to add even more dangerous ingredients.
So how does all of this go with the whole MAHA agenda? That's just such a contradiction.
Well, what I've been told is the White House is against this rider. But the White House, this is not something the White House has control over. This is in Congress. And presumably, lobbying. I mean, when Bayer has a war chest of $17 billion, there can be quite a lot of lobbying. And so we have to rely on members of Congress who, have their own incentives to do things. And I'm sure that some of them have been given lots of money for their campaigns to try to push this through. And we will, when there's a lot of money at stake, will all the calls from constituents matter? Who's in charge? Who decides whether this bill goes through? Is it Mike Johnson, who's the speaker? Can he tell the Republicans, get rid of it? Right now, most or all of the Democrats are against it. And basically in the subcommittee, the vote was party line. So 5 Dems voted against it, 8 Republicans voted in favor. In the full committee, there was only a voice vote and nobody called for a roll call because nobody, at that point, they had decided, the Dems had apparently decided that it wasn't worth their while to get the Republicans on, to have them, to have it known who voted in favor of this, that the Democrats were not going to force the Republicans to put their names on their vote.
Why
So it was a
not?
voice
Why
vote.
not? Why didn't they
Why
want to
didn't
force
they?
them?
Well, I would have to speculate again that either they were paid off or they made a deal. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And they allowed the Republicans to skirt being, having an official piece of paper that said you voted for this bill. So all the Republicans can say, oh, no, I didn't vote for it. That was somebody else.
Yes, as can the Democrats, by the way, because you can voice your opposition while you're safe to voice it, and then vote the other way, right?
Right. Exactly.
Wow. But still, the contrast between the whole Make America Healthy agenda and this, which there's a real danger of this amounting to a kind of pesticide liability shield for manufacturers. At least it will make it way more difficult to sue them. That is just astounding, I think. And many members of Congress are supposedly in favor of MAHA, or not?
Right. So I don't think any members that were on this committee were on the MAHA caucus.
Mm-hmm.
This is obviously an anti-MAHA agenda bill. And we're going to have to see how they vote. And somebody's going to have to call for a roll call. And yes, put their feet to the fire and not just say, well, it wins, by acclamation, or the no's, the yeses have it with a voice vote. So
exactly. Because in the case of the PrEP Act, you had all these. You had Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton and other people speak out very forcefully against the PrEP Act, and then they all voted in favor of the whole bill.
Right.
All right. So
politics.
Yes. Okay. So this is all pretty awful. And there's I think just by talking about it for a little bit, you see where all this leads and how many other things we could talk about here. But let's go to the sewage, let's go to the other one, the sewage thing, because that is also very, very interesting. And that is section, I'm going to share my screen again because this is very similar to this section 4453. It's also very, very short. I think it's also just like one sentence.
8 lines.
It's 8 lines. Okay. 8 little lines. And let's have a look at that. Okay. It's section.
And I want to contextualize it if you will let me.
Of course. Absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay. So what is sewage sludge? Whenever you flush the toilet or put something down the drain, If you don't have a septic tank, it goes to a town or city water treatment facility. Well, not only your waste, so that could be anything. It could be food, it's personal care products, pharmaceuticals, as well as your so-called organic, wastes of urine and stool and toilet paper. But also industries all have sinks and toilets and other things, and their wastes, most of the time, there are some that aren't allowed to, but much of their waste also goes to the sewage treatment plant. Now, I was always under the false impression that the sewage treatment plant processed things to make them non-toxic things, to make them non-toxic. That was not the case. It turns out that the sewage treatment plants basically they change the pH of the liquid, they add water, they kill bacteria, almost all the bacteria that are in this mix, and then they separate it into liquid and solid waste. And they take the liquid and put it into rivers or ocean. So my water supply in the town of Ellsworth, Maine, comes from the river. So I may be drinking what came from the sewage treatment plant upriver. Now, the solid, what do they do with that? Well, in some cases it goes to a landfill. In some cases it's incinerated, and there may be toxic products entering the air. So some of that is regulated by the EPA. But 56% of the solid material then is actually sprayed on land, and most of it is sprayed on farmland. And the EPA came up with this idea in the early 1990s because nobody ever knew what do you do with waste products? What do you do with human waste and industrial waste? Besides digging a hole in the earth and putting it in, what can you do with it? And they decided, well, there are these organic substances, nitrogen and phosphorus, that are in human wastes and are going to be in these waste products. And those are what farmers need to fertilize their plants and what gardeners need. So we can just rename it. They came up with a name. They paid a company to produce a good name, and they renamed this sewage material Biosolids. And they allowed in fact, they encouraged, in some cases, they paid farmers to allow it to be spread on their land. In my state, because there was a lot of forever chemicals in the sewage sludge, which got put on land even 20 or 30 years ago, it turned out it was killing cows. When cows were eating the hay from these areas, or when other things happened, and the land was tested, they had tremendous amounts of PFAS, which I'm not going to say what that stands for, but it's forever chemicals that enter your body and stay there. They often come off of plastics. They are in Teflon, in your pots and pans if you're still using Teflon. They line the inside of bottles and cans, and these forever chemicals leach out into our food and water.
Yes, and I just want to add that they are called forever chemicals, as far as I know, because they are so hard to break down, and there are tons of them. They are very hard. They're very persistent. So that's why the water treatment plants, I mean, if they would like to filter them out or break them down into something harmless, but they can't. It's a real problem. They haven't figured out how to do this, and that is why they end up in this what is called biosolid, in this harmless sounding name, in this sewage, which it really is sewage sludge, but sounds much nicer as a biosolid. So the sewage sludge contains stuff that we don't know how to get rid of. We know it's toxic. But they must have known that even when was that? Like 35 years ago, when they started spraying it on land. I mean, the idea of spraying it on land is just nuts.
Yes.
I mean, fine. There's harmless stuff in there, obviously, but there's also not harmless stuff. So spray it on farmland. How did they come up with that idea? It's kind of
Well, there
amazing.
was corruption at the EPA. And David Lewis, who was a top scientist at the EPA, wrote a book called Science for Sale, published in 2014. And he tells the story of exactly how this happened, who did it, what deals were made, and how it happened. And
Oh, wow, interesting. I have to read that book.
yeah, it's a very well written book. It turns out also that other countries also spread sewage sludge on land, but they measure toxins in it, and they have levels of these forever chemicals that cannot be exceeded. So they're more careful about it. In the United States, according to David Lewis, the EPA requires the treatment facilities to measure 9 heavy metals, so arsenic, lead, things, cadmium, things like that, mercury. They can't have toxic levels of 9 of these elements, heavy metals, but they are not required to measure anything else except nitrogen and phosphorus to prove that the stuff, some of it will act as fertilizer. And any toxic materials, anything could be in it, whatever, depending on the factories that are in your neighborhood, solvents, as well as these PFAS. And you don't know because it's going to vary from time to time and from one sewage facility to the next. So you don't know what you're putting on your land. And according to the New York Times, 20% of farmland has taken out permits to use this stuff. So it's been applied to 20% of our farms. And so we're eating food that has been grown on land where this has been spread.
So, and I also read that. So you said the EPA is not required to measure to measure this stuff, and I also read that it has not set any limits, like saying, "Oh, this is a toxic limit." I mean, since they're not measuring it, why would they set limits, right? Because
Right,
what's the
right,
purpose of
exactly.
setting limits if you don't measure it? But so there are no limits. We don't really know, or they don't know when it becomes really toxic. Uh, are these the farms that still spray this stuff? Are they still being paid for it for that?
I don't think they're paid anymore. I think in many cases they were given it for free, but now there's a big industry, a biosolids industry. Um,
Oh
and
yeah.
a multi-billion-dollar industry, and so they are the ones lobbying to keep this scam going. Okay, so what does this rider say? So finally, after Congress has actually instructed the EPA, and EPA ignored them for years, but Congress required them to start measuring and figuring out what is in this, what's a toxic level, etc. And so a draft
When did Congress do this? When was that?
years
Which
ago,
year?
at least 5 years ago.
Okay. Okay.
Um, and so 1 week before the Biden administration left office, EPA released a draft report on these PFAS, the forever chemicals in sewage sludge. And in the draft report, they acknowledge that it can cause problems with a fetus, endocrine disruption, problems with the liver and kidney, and that it's probably a carcinogen. So what this rider does is say, okay, this draft report came out, but now you're not allowed to spend any money. No federal money can be used to finalize it. It's a draft report, so it's not final. You can't finalize it. You can't implement it. You can't administer or enforce it. You can't use it in any way to set policy. And so, why would the federal government spend millions and millions of dollars to do the studies, create this draft report, and then pass a bill? Congress required them to do it. Congress said you have to spend this money. You have to figure out whether the PFAS in sewage sludge is a problem and come up with some solutions. And what this rider says, stop the process. We don't want to know. We're not going to let you know. You can't spend any money to move forward. with regulating sewage sludge
Yeah,
and PFAS.
exactly. And it says it right here. So I pulled it up. It says Section 507, none of the funds made available by this or any other act may be used to finalize, implement, administer, or enforce the draft risk assessment titled Draft Sewage Sludge Risk Assessment for, oh my goodness, perfluorooctanoic acid, and this other one, this PFOS, published by the EPA in the Federal Register on January 15, 2025. Now, this is, I mean, if it weren't so horrible, it would be absolutely hilarious because, as you just pointed out, it was Congress that mandated the EPA, said, hey, guys, you at EPA, finally do this risk assessment. It's important. We need to know how toxic our sewage sludge is. Go do it. And then EPA takes, I don't know how many years to do it. They finally do it. And now now they have this draft. They have a draft. It's not finalized. Again, this thing with not finalizing stuff, right? So EPA has this draft thing about how dangerous sewage sludge is. And now and now imagine this. Now the same Congress that asked them that order them to do this is trying to pass a bill ordering that EPA is not allowed to finalize it. It's just hilarious.
Yes, exactly. I mean, it's almost too amazing to be believed. But this is how things work that's why they call it a swamp in Washington. So this rider was inserted also, a day before the subcommittee met, and it was passed. It was passed by the subcommittee. It was passed by the full committee. My Congresswoman from Maine, Chellie Pingree, spoke against it. And nobody seemed to care. So it is in the bill. It's in the earlier bill, the pesticide riders, only in the House version of the bill. But this one is in both the House and Senate versions, and is likely to go forward. And people really need to think about this stuff is cumulative, so it doesn't go away. So if you put it on the land, it stays there for a number of years. The bond between fluorine and carbon is one of the strongest bonds you can have in chemistry, and nothing we have at the moment can break that bond. During treatment, some of these forever chemicals will turn into a different forever chemical, but sometimes that one is more toxic than the first one. So
Yeah.
there is no way to fix this problem technically at the moment. So what we have to do is stop spraying it on our farmlands. And we've got a draft report. EPA should be moving forward, finalizing the report, and issuing new regulations so that if you do want to spread something on farmland, you've got to at least measure that it's not terribly toxic. It's not going to harm us. It's not going to cause cancer in the eaters of the food.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And Meryl, these new we are capable of. We have the technical capabilities to create these new chemicals that we don't really understand very well. And turns out some of them are forever chemicals. Well, probably not forever, but they are extremely hard. They're hard to break down. They're extremely persistent. And we do this stuff and we don't really understand the consequences of what we're doing in many cases, right? We don't know what the new products are actually. We don't understand the risk of these new products, but we start using them. And for example, I had no idea just a few years ago that this PFAS chemicals cannot be broken down by waterworks. It's impossible. The chemists are trying their work. There are chemists who are looking at this and studying it and trying to find solutions, and it's extremely difficult and will be extremely expensive also probably when they find some sort of way. Well, maybe they'll find a cheap way, but who knows? Right now, they don't know how to do it. And the general population, many people don't even know about this. So there is no general awareness of the dangers of the chemicals that we are creating. Yes.
That's right. The biggest problem is people have no idea. I had no idea until a couple of years ago. You just assume that a sewage treatment plant is either treating your waste correctly or putting it in a lined landfill where it is protected and it's not getting into the drinking water. This stuff, by spreading it on the farmland, it's getting into the groundwater everywhere. It's gotten into some aquifers. We can't get away from it. If you have a carbon filter or a reverse osmosis filter, you can get rid of most of it. But otherwise, it's in the water supply of, I think half of Americans.
Good for pointing that out. People should get a really good carbon filter or this reverse osmosis to get at least some of that stuff out. But this section 507, who is behind this? You said that this sewage sludge has developed into a real industry.
Yes.
So
it saves municipalities money because they can just have these sludge companies, these biosolids companies come and collect the waste, and they'll take it away, right? And the town will pay, but it's cheaper to put it in a truck than to put it in a safe landfill. And then the guys with the trucks. So this is true. This is what the top sewage, the person who's in charge of water treatment in my town told me. He said, look, in Maine, we were the first state about 3 years ago to ban the land application of sewage sludge. So what happens is we truck it to Canada. Canada puts it in bags, labels it as fertilizer, and sells it back to us. And
no kidding. Is that
I'm
true?
not kidding. I am not kidding. And the Sierra Club
That's unbelievable.
They tested 9 or 10 different bags from different states of fertilizer, and they found 7 of them were 100% sewage sludge, and one of them was 50%, and one of them was about 90% sewage sludge.
So they could have had that cheaper without banning it and just using it as
and
is,
this
right?
is the stuff we're putting in our gardens unknowingly, thinking it's fertilizer and not knowing where it comes from. Now, a couple of years ago, some of the bags would be labeled no biosolids, but I found that they're taking that label off now. I couldn't find it at the garden store anymore. And I think they're all filled with the sewage sludge. So I'm not buying any more soil amendments at the garden store after this.
So that means even when you ban sewage sludge, a land application, as happened in Maine, and I think it happened also somewhere else. So at some states, it's Connecticut. Oh, these are the only 2 where it's banned?
Yes.
So, okay. So even if you ban it, it doesn't really, well, I guess if you sell it to Canada, you sell the stuff to Canada or some other country, and they sell it back to you. Now you don't have to buy it, right? Maine could have said, no, we don't want our own sewage sludge stuff. We don't want to spend money on buying that back from you, but they didn't. But I mean, the whole thing is so crazy. So even if you ban it, you might get it back in some way. Absolutely unbelievable. So now they want to make sure that this draft is never finalized and that there will not be a risk assessment. So they are trying to suppress, what they do trying here is suppressing the information about the dangers of sewage sludge. Do I get that right?
Correct. And the biosolids industry that's making money from selling the fertilizer, from trucking the biosolids around, and it's, as I said, it's a multi-billion-dollar business, and they are willing to pay money to lobby and got this rider.
Right. Well, who cares about all these billions if every single person is sick, chronically ill, developing cancers? I mean,
This is another anti-MAHA rider, and it's a Republican rider, and really the Republicans should be frightened of, that. I don't think the sludge industry had a $17 billion war chest. It probably just had $1 million or so, and why they have allowed this to go forward is beyond me. But it does show you that if you're not watching your members of Congress closely, they'll do all kinds of things that really that harm everybody and help nobody but one industry.
Yes, and then they also do good things. I mean, it's great that Congress ordered the EPA to finally do a risk assessment for sewage sludge.
Yes.
Good, well done. And then, well, years later, they are undoing this. So it's a different Congress, obviously, and it changes all the time. But now they are doing the good work of before. Now, I never would have even thought this whole thing is so absurd. I would have thought this is not even how is this possible that they are able to put a rider in that undoes what they mandated earlier, because it's so
Yes, it
strange.
seems extraordinary.
Yeah,
It's
very,
like
but
you
definitely
voted to
extraordinary.
get this risk assessment, and now you're voting to bury the risk assessment. Are
Yeah,
you the same people?
exactly, exactly.
And
But
so it's definitely worth calling your member of Congress, whether your two senators and your representative, and say, this is no good. Both of these riders need to be voted down. They don't help anyone. We've spent money to create this report. We spent money to study glyphosate, and now you're trying to bury all the adverse information so that we can be exposed to more and more toxic substances going forward. Why is that a good thing? Why are we paying your salaries to do that? I,
exactly. And how many people are in these subcommittees that discuss this bill? That's probably like a couple of dozen or so.
there were, let me see, there were about 13 that were at the meeting. I think there were about 15 in the subcommittee. There are, the full committee had about 63 members. And, now it's up to the full House, which has what,
Right.
458 or something.
Yeah, something like that, 450 something. So that means most members of Congress probably don't really understand, probably
Right.
haven't
They're
read the
not aware.
bill. They're not aware. They don't know about these riders. They are members of other subcommittees for which they prepare. Um, so the large majority of representatives might not even be aware of the significance of these riders that were added not that long ago.
Mhm.
So that shows you. It also shows you the danger of having these explosive things discussed in relatively small organs of this larger organ, and then most of the people there not being aware of what this is about, but somehow accepting what they hear and say, okay, if you vote for
Yes,
this, then we are going to vote for this
exactly.
other thing that you like, and we don't really like it, so we just do this deal.
Right. Leadership
Uh,
told me to vote like this, so this is how I'm voting.
Yeah, 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 exactly. But what is so important here is that we don't really understand what we are doing with these chemicals. We have these forever chemical things now that we can't get rid of. We have also all this medical, people use so many medications in the United States. And I don't know, that's also going lots of
Yes.
leftover medication is flushed down the toilet, or even if
Right. In
even if
in
you
human
take it,
waste,
and
there's plenty
yeah,
of
I don't know how much
pharmaceuticals.
of it persists in human waste. So the awareness that we have to be careful what we are doing, that we don't really understand the consequences of the chemicals that we are producing, that is something so important. And that's something that hasn't really, maybe it's going to take another 100 years to for people to really absorb this, and that we have to change our behavior and have to be way more careful and think and explore the consequences of what we want to do before we actually do it.
Cornelia, I'm not going to accept that 100 years because we'll all be dead by then. If we allow this to continue, um, these are reasons why we are not healthy anymore in this
Yes,
country.
correct, correct. But this has been building up over the last decades, and people weren't aware of it. They weren't aware of, just even like how bad sugar is for you and all these emulsifiers and other
Yes.
adjuvants that are now put into our food. Nobody suspected that, and nobody suspected that there are these forever chemicals popping up everywhere now. So, but that has been happening over the last, I don't know, over the last probably 60, 80 years or so. And
Well, what happened with the food is the government incentivized farmers to grow monocrops of soy and corn in particular. And so these products were then, soy and corn were treated as industrial products and broken down. And then meal was used for feeding animals, or, they took the seed out so that it wouldn't, it would stay fresh, it wouldn't rot, and created these seed oils, polyunsaturated oils from them, which are not good for us, created gasohol, and some other industrial products, and basically a meal that had almost no nutritional value. And then the companies started adding things to produce flavors and to produce mouthfeel, and texture. And so we got chemicalized without realizing it, and the food became more and more ultra processed as more chemicals were discovered that could do one thing or another. And so we've been eating for taste, and everything that's, highly processed has almost no nutrition in it. And so
And
we're
it's
stuck
highly,
with
and
that.
yeah, and it's highly addictive. I mean, the stuff is addictive. That's why people keep
Yes.
eating it. Even if they feel bad afterwards, they'll eat it again a week later because
Yes.
they're addictive.
And you said we're
addicted.
eating sugar, but we're actually not eating as much sugar as we're eating high fructose corn syrup,
Correct.
which is even worse for us than sugar. And it's, again, one of the byproducts of corn. So the government has basically paid farmers to grow these products instead of growing fruits and vegetables, and instead of growing healthy animals for slaughter. So right now we are importing 35% of our vegetables, 65% of our fruits. We are a net importer of beef, and 26% of our ground beef is imported. And again, what's the quality? I mean, they're using pesticides in some countries that aren't even allowed in the United States. The animals are not under the strict rules of the United States, nor are the fruits and vegetables. But our government has incentivized monocrops here. So the whole system has to change. And unfortunately, that's a lot of different industries that are going to be affected and that don't want to change. But
Yes,
if
that's
we're
true.
to become a healthy country again, we're going to have to start eating real food and getting real nutrition.
That's true. So, I think the upshot of all of this is be very skeptical. Be very skeptical. Do your own research. Question everything. And in the case of this, with this bill, with these two riders, call your congressman, call them or email them, get in touch with them and tell them about it, because they actually might know less about it than you do. They
Yes.
just might not know. They don't have a huge staff like senators. They don't have the time and the manpower to investigate every little sentence in this bill. They do not understand if they're not in these subcommittees, and they need to be told by their constituents that they are not in favor of just to inform them also of the risks.
Right. Let me
And
tell you something else, Cornelia, before we end, is that the members of Congress were actually lied to about the pesticide bill. They were told it does not provide a liability shield, that it's only about this interstate commerce and harmonizing the labels between the states. And so, Bayer's people lobbied about that, and we had constituents calling their congressman, and the congressmen were saying this bill does nothing of the sort. So we've been fooled, and Congress has been fooled too. And it's very important that you tell them you're not accepting that rationale. There's no, you don't need a bill for that purpose. California does have the right to put a different label on a product if it wants. And this is really about providing liability for some period of time for all pesticides. And if they say it isn't, they need to read the bill.
Yes, well, I think, Meryl, you are very gracious. I don't cut them that much slack because, if you tell Congress, oh, we are just doing this to harmonize labels, do not worry, So I'm a congressman from, let's say, New York. I'm going to say, what, are you kidding me? I have my New York labels, and that's a good reason why we label it that way. I don't want any harmonization, because what that means is some lowest denominator. That
Right.
doesn't mean anything. So forget, that's just obviously some reason that doesn't make any sense, and there's some ugly truth hiding behind it. And I just tell me the ugly reason behind it. And plus, they have lawyers and there's among their staff, and they can ask them about what's behind the harmonizing labels. So I think that's just a good attempt to get out of this. No.
This
Absolutely
is
not.
these are two dirty bills. They're
yes.
very dirty. Nobody wants to admit that they are voting for either of these knowingly. So they'll tell you they misunderstood it, or that they were lied to. Yeah.
I know. Poor bunnies. They misunderstood it. Yes. Okay. No. So please, there's still time. Call your congressman. It's actually amazing what a difference it makes to, if you will talk. Of course, you're not going to talk to your congressman or your congresswoman, obviously, but you're going to talk to a staffer. And these staffers, believe me, because I know from experience, they will give the message. If they get even just 3 calls today or tomorrow about this is going to be quite extraordinary. It doesn't have to be 300 or 3,000.
Yes.
They are going to tell their congressman or their congresswoman, they're going to tell them about it. And that will make them pause, because this human interaction, is super important, and it makes a real difference. So don't think, oh, what does it matter? I'm just a cog in a wheel that nobody controls, and I'm not going to waste my time. No. It's not that. It really is not.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you. I think we dug into this, I think, a little bit, enough to show how ugly this is, and we leave it at that. Thank you very much, Meryl.
Thank you very much, Cornelia. It's been a great interview again.
Thank you.